Tell us who you are and where you come from. It's great to have you here, so welcome. Just wait a few more minutes. So it's wonderful. We have people from Copenhagen to Vietnam to South Africa, Nigeria. It's really exciting. Italy, Lebanon, USA, Romania. From China, Ethiopia. Welcome, welcome everyone. Very happy to have you on our show here. So I think it's 4 minutes past 1 o'clock. So I think we'll begin. I'm Supriya Bezbarua. I'm the team lead for science translation in WHO headquarters. And our team looks at trying to make science, especially in public health emergencies, useful, relevant, and meaningful to people. So today we have a very exciting session with 3 very different but very interesting approaches to reaching the hearts of people and getting science to the hearts of people through art. We will have to start with Christopher Bailey, who's the Arts and Health lead in WHO. And then we have Hannah Dethlefsen and Isabel Colchester. Hannah is from the Francis Crick Institute. She's program public engagement manager exhibitions for the Francis Crick Institute, which is one of the leading scientific institutes in the UK. And Isabel is the chief executive of Poet in the City. And we'll hear about the wonderful things they did when they got together. And then finally, we have Bryony Thomas, Dr. Bryony Thomas of the University of Leeds. She's Associate Professor of Design Science at the University of Leeds. And she works on participatory approaches of creative sciences in schools, working with underserved communities in the north of England, working with teachers and young people to increase children's understanding of the role of science in society. And please put all your questions in the Q&A part of the of Zoom, and we'll try and answer your questions as best we can. We will have a little bit of time at the end also for answering those questions. This session will be recorded, and it's also live on YouTube, just to let you know. So without further ado, over to Christopher. Christopher, tell us what you're doing as the Art and Health lead.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure. Well, to boil it down, the program really falls into 3 categories. The first is looking at the evidence base for the health benefits of the arts. The second is having on-the-ground programs in communities of arts-based health interventions of one sort or another. And then the third is working with the global media. And I think in the context of COVID and the pandemic, there have been an interesting array of different types of approaches from all across the organization. I think the first one was perhaps the most gaudy. That was the Together at Home concert at the beginning of the pandemic, which was curated by Lady Gaga, if you remember. But it also, I think, is significant because it reached every corner of the globe at a critical time of the pandemic. If you remember, the primary messaging of that event was the critical health messaging at the beginning of the pandemic of hand hygiene, safe distancing, staying at home, honoring the healthcare workers. But what was also interesting about that event, and I think central to this conversation, is that it was actually more than just health messaging, that by having artists, performers, musicians come together and share their personal stories with the frontline workers to the entire world, it actually created a sense of community. As the name of the event implies, it was as much about solidarity and about the human community as it was about any of the more specific health messaging. Some of the other COVID-related arts work that was happening over the course of the pandemic included things like a really interesting program in the mental health department that was led by our colleague Fahmi Hanna, where he would take comic strips and illustrated children's books and adapt them to local settings to appeal directly to children and engage them emotionally in COVID, not just for health messaging, but also to reassure them, to give them a sense of agency, of hope, of a future that was attainable. And I think that was one of the important aspects that artists across the globe played, and WHO took a very great interest in, is that beyond the public health messaging, there was also the need to shore up the mental health effects of the pandemic. And there was another project where I worked with Google, and we developed a whole series of programs for people in lockdown, in isolation, to use creativity in the arts to connect with each other, to themselves, to the environment, by using the arts for deep observation, deep listening, deep connection, with primarily a mental health objective. And then most recently, there was a project in India that I was quite proud of called the Corona Quilt, where we supported a project where women, artisans from across the country, all created a small cloth tile that represented their Corona experience. And two artists came together and literally sewed them together into this monumental quilt, which was then revealed in Jaipur. And it was an amazing event because it not only captured the experiences, the authentic, real life lived experiences of people across that society from all walks of life, but also began to tell stories of regeneration, of hope. And I think what was interesting about this project was that it went from preparing a population for the pandemic, which was, you know, what the Lady Gaga concert was all about, to this project at the end of the pandemic, which was a sense-making exercise of what's just happened. What did we go through, and how do we recreate ourselves for what happens next? And this goes to, I think, to the heart of the healing power of the arts. It provides, just like the quilt itself, it provides comfort. It creates community because it's something that you work on as a group and share as a group. And it's an act of compassion. But ultimately, it's also a way of using our creativity, even in the face of adversity, to imagine a positive and constructive way forward. And that, I think, is the real blessing, because at the end of the day, when you think about it, what is hope? Hope is a creative act. So that's what I'd like to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Chris. That sounds really exciting. This quilt, especially where people's experiences in COVID come together in the shape of a Corona quilt. That's fantastic.
Oh, it was wonderful, I have to say.
And it all leads to hope, That's a wonderful, upbeat way to end it. And actually, this is the beginning of a journey. I think, I'd like to see more and more science being communicated, connected to art,
Well,
because it's an
I think
integral
what's
part of us.
interesting about these projects too is that on the one hand, it's about going to the general public to communicate science issues. But on the other hand, it's also about communicating to the scientific community the value of creativity and the value of the imagination. And that's why I like to call it arts and health rather than arts in health, because it actually toggles
Yes.
both ways.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Arts and health, arts, science, and health. It's all together.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll have questions at the end, and also people will be asking questions on the Q&A part. But we go over to more on arts and health in COVID-19. For that, we now request Hannah to speak about her experiences with the Francis Crick Institute and what they did together with Isabel from Poet in the City, and how they use poetry to support people and help people's anxieties. So over to you,
Thank you
Hannah
so
and
much.
Isabel.
Thanks so much, Supriya. I'm just going to take a moment to bring up
Yeah,
my presentation. And I want to thank Judith and Supriya for the invitation to speak, and also Chris. That was such a great transition. Our project actually is called A Drop of Hope, and really speaks to what you were just mentioning. And the project took place at the Francis Crick Institute, but it was a partnership project with Poet in the City. And so what I'll do is just start by introducing who we are at the Crick. And so the Francis Crick Institute, for people who aren't familiar with us, we are a biomedical research lab in the heart of central London. And the core of what happens at the Crick is discovery research into human health and disease. But one of the core streams of work we also have is public engagement program, which is what I'm a part of. And the public engagement team, our mission is to grow and diversify the community of people who feel like science and the work that we do at the Crick is for them. And one of the ways we do that is with our exhibitions program. So we have the Manby Gallery, which is available free to access to the public all year round. And we have an exhibition every year and invite people in to learn a little bit more about the kind of cutting edge research that is happening at the Crick. Because of this opportunity to work here in the gallery program, that means I have a great opportunity to work with amazing creative partners like Poet in the City. And so I'll pass off to Isabel to share a little bit about what they do. And also, I'm not sure if you can see her on the screen, so if the moderators could make her visible, that would be great too.
Great, thank you, Hannah. So yes, as Hannah says, I'm Isabel, I'm from Poet in the City, and we're a producing organisation with a focus on listening to the stories that matter most to communities and translating those into imaginative poetry productions, new commissions, exhibitions, community collaborations and talent development. And at the heart of everything that we're doing is using poetry as a tool to amplify new narratives or stories which are not so well heard, and to reimagine the world around us. We work very collaboratively with partners like the Crick, and also with community leaders and artists, so that we can find ways to tell stories on their terms. And we find that this is a great way of helping to build new skills and creating space for lots of different people to contribute to art which is really relevant to them. There's 3 different ways that we work. We produce events, so festivals, events in heritage buildings, everyday spaces, cathedrals. We run a young producers program, training young people to produce arts events, and we create new large-scale commissioning programs, which range from working with an individual community leader in an estate to tell the story of her estate, to a large-scale program with public libraries across the country and working with different activists to think about the scene in each of their cities. And of course, our collaboration with the Francis Crick Institute. And we've had regular scientific collaborations, including with the Francis Crick Institute. And we find, as has already been talked about today, that this opportunity to collaborate with scientists to think about the impact of science on our everyday lives, and actually the sort of human side of that and what that means to us as individuals, and our work putting artists and poets into contact with that science as a means of translating and connecting is really effective and something that we really enjoy.
So I'll take back the reins and I'll just share with you the project that we've come here to talk about. And it's called A Drop of Hope. And it's poetry from a vaccination center, and it ran last summer. This is a photograph of the installation at its completion. What I'll do is just start by talking a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the project, what we did, why we did it, and how it happened. And then I will pass off again later to Isabel to talk a little bit more about the creative process and the work that she did with Poet in the City to bring this project to life. So I'll start with our usual space. This is the Manby Gallery. So this is the space in which we invite approximately 25,000 people a year to come to a free exhibition about science and the research that's happening at the Crick. And this is one of the main ways that we reach out and we try and reach that goal of diversifying and growing the community of people who think that science is for them. But in December 2020, our gallery was changed into a vaccination center. And so we lost our space where we would normally interact with people and share science with them. However, we understood that we would have up to 1,000 people coming into the gallery to have a meaningful interaction with science, to receive their vaccination. And so we really wanted to reach out to this up to 1,000 people a day, especially because we knew they would be people from all walks of life, not just people who would normally attend an exhibition. There would be anybody who would be coming to get a vaccine. And what we wanted to do was, one, to make the vaccine center as warm and welcoming as possible so people would feel welcome to come in and receive their vaccine. We also wanted to highlight the impact of science on their everyday life through this vaccination effort. We also wanted to acknowledge the individual contributions of everybody who was coming in to get their vaccine in this larger scientific program. And we also wanted to build trust within the local community, the people who lived in our area, encouraging them to come in and feel welcome to get their vaccine at the Crick. So these were some of the projects that inspired us. So these participatory art projects invite visitors to each do one small action, and collectively you can see the contribution of everyone growing into the larger effort of the installation. And it really was a metaphor for how individual people receiving vaccinations were making a contribution to a wider scientific effort. So this was our inspiration of what we wanted to achieve through our project. So we approached a curator who came up with a few different ways that we could do this. But before we just went ahead and chose one, what we wanted to do was check in with our community and see which of the ideas was chiming with them, and to ensure that however we carried it out, it was meaningful for them. So we conducted a few focus groups, and that really helped to shape what the exhibition would be like. And particularly for this project, what we heard from our community was, if you want to make the vaccination center welcoming to us, please welcome us in our languages. So what we ended up doing, you'll see, is that the poetry is not just written in English, it's also written in Somali and Bengali, which are two of the other primary languages that are spoken in our immediate neighborhood. So I'm just going to switch views for a moment. We created a film about the exhibition, and I think it actually does a better job of summing it up than I will here. So I'll just play this. It's about 4 minutes or so.
People have been coming here to receive inoculation and have expressed their feelings and divulged their situation to be made into our poems for the public observation.
I didn't expect to be nervous. In the morning, light shone through the coloured glass. I was nervous, but happy. After losing Auntie, after losing my best friend, I said, Please, don't point your temperature gun at my head.
Waving not kissing, হাত মেলানো নয়, ইশারা শুধু, mother in a fortress. দূর থেকে মাকে দেখা, তবু the importance of touch, missing. স্পর্শের আকুতি ভোলা যায়।
The Drop of Hope is a participatory art project that uses the voices of our community, and it's held in a vaccination center.
People who came in to get vaccinated at the creek or volunteers, they were all given these postcards with prompts, and it was all about their feelings and reflections about the year, the vaccine, the pandemic, everything.
We collected all of their written responses, and 12 poets who were commissioned by Poet in the City wrote poetry in response to the thousands of voices we heard from the community.
We watched the news. We worked 84 hours a week and only received a rainbow badge. He lost his work overnight. Never-ending screen time. I've not danced with anyone in a year. I didn't really know what to expect, and I tried not to come to this data with any preconceptions and just to let the themes emerge. I also set myself this constraint, which was to just use the words there that other people had used, again, because I didn't want to impose my own feelings about this last year on any of it.
The design was inspired by the NHS rainbow, and if you come to the crick, you'll see that every poem has their own color. So as the installation has been growing over time, we've been growing a rainbow on the outside of our vaccine center.
Slowing down, being quiet. একবার যদি থামি, একবার যদি ভাবি. See children grow up in slow motion. আমার আত্মজনেরা আমায় ঘিরে, প্রতিদিন দেয়া সার আর পানিতে সতেজ লকলকে. So there was a line that seeing my children grow up in slow motion. You know, somebody wrote that, and I thought that's such a beautiful line. I tried to capture that in Bangla as sometimes as a direct translation, but most of the time as kind of like a response to those lines as well.
Gratitude for people pulling together. Tearful gratitude for all who've worked so hard and faced danger so I can be here now. Gratitude for the wildlife and water of Walthamstow wetlands. Gratitude for the wave of a granddaughter when there is no place for an embrace, waving, not kissing. I was nervous about doing this project because it's a serious thing and it's a big responsibility. But the things that people had written, I felt put at ease because I thought, well, I'm just trying to do something with what you have written.
This project was different because it kind of made me go back to my roots in a way. I enjoyed the process so much, I think I'm going to experiment with it more.
My role as a poet was to just work with the information they'd already gathered in order to turn it into this piece of public art, I guess, that would then be an impetus for more people to reflect.
It's beautiful. You know, I'm proud, you know, I want to bring my brother down and show him it. Gratitude for a new freedom on the horizon, for the good there is and the good there is yet to be. Gratitude for the smile of a stranger, if only in the eyes. Gratitude, possibly, for extra supplies of poetry.
Just transition back into the presentation. I think that does quite a good job of sharing what the project was, but I'll just share a couple more details. So as you can imagine, this project was done quite quickly in response to the vaccine center being created on site. So we did the physical installation in 3 batches. So we collected information, we shared it with the poets, and it was done in 3 groups, and we grew this rainbow on the outside. I also mentioned earlier about sharing the poetry in 3 languages. So every poem was displayed in its own original written language. But what we did was we added translations of the artist's statement so that no matter who you were coming to visit, you could access the artist's statement and understand the artist's intention in your own language. We also made an effort to make the poetry accessible by audio. So on the bottom left corner of the artist statement, you can see this NaviLens QR code, and that is something that we partnered with the Royal National Institute for Blind People to help give access for people who are blind and partially sighted. And we were able then to use this audio and share it also on our website. So if you want to hear some of the poems individually, you can go on the website and take a closer look at each of the poems as well. And I'll just quickly share kind of the results. So at this time where we could have had zero interaction with people, what we were able to do with this, thanks to the help from Poet in the City, was to interact very closely with 3,000 people who left their postcard responses. We were able to create 12 new poems. And from the time we started the installation, 46,000 potential viewers came through our vaccine center. So we were able to reach more than double the normal number of people that we would normally have in the Manby Gallery. And we also were able to reach people through the website. And what was really exciting was the interest that we got from other potential partners as well. So Poet in the City teamed up with London Sinfonietta, who commissioned 4 new classical compositions to go along with 4 of the poems. And also the National Poetry Library reached out to us as well, and some of our postcards are a part of their collection now. So it's been a real delight to work on this project and to see all of the impact that we've been able to have. Personally, for me, what I've really enjoyed is to see both on our community side as well as internally with our senior executives, the enthusiasm for this participatory way of working. And it's something that I really want to establish as we move forward. So I'm going to pass on to Isabel. So if the moderators can make her visible again, that would be great as well.
Thanks, Hannah. So I was just going to talk a little bit about why the ethos of poetry was appropriate and worked well with this project. And I think, we have to think about, as Christopher was talking about, the moment that we were in, the many moments that made up the pandemic. When we were anticipating the vaccination effort, our opportunity as individuals to get vaccinated, we were very isolated and sort of physically disconnected from each other. There was great apprehension, hope, fear, dream, opportunity, all of the build-up of the previous year. And we were really mindful of that when we were working with the CRIC to think through this program of work. And I think one of the really powerful things about poetry is that it can tell an individual story as well as make this contribution towards this broader collective narrative. And poets as individual artists are not seeking to speak on behalf of a community. They wanted to work together to find a way to sum up some of the vast number of different stories and experiences and write to that community. And as we know, there's no single way to express how people have experienced the pandemic. And so there was this idea that the way that the project interacted with people who were turning up and engaging really served to play a role in their experience of getting a vaccination. So as Hannah has said, the wall of poems was intended as a welcome, so that people arriving at the vaccination centre would be quite literally welcomed by the words of the many people who had come before them, and be enveloped and feel connected to that, and perhaps see something that might connect with their own experience. So that was really important. And then the very act of writing a postcard to one of our 12 artists to answer some questions about how you were feeling and your experiences of the pandemic, this idea of connecting with someone who is going to translate and amplify that story at a time of disconnection in many ways, felt really powerful and important. And we hope that those two things, that greeting and that opportunity to connect, really helped the people who were turning up and the people who were writing those postcards to feel heard and part of something broader. And on the next slide, as I mentioned, this is very much about creating poetry for a community, not about a community. I think that's really important. So, we wanted to offer something to the CRICS community, the people who were turning up to contribute towards the vaccine effort. And as Hannah has talked about, it's really important that the community was involved, the local community was involved in the decision making about the fact that this project should go ahead and take the form that it did. And they were consulted and connected with throughout, and I know spoke to many of our artists. And then the voices of the community of people who went to go and be vaccinated at the CRIC are then captured in a multitude of different ways across the poems in locally prominent languages. And again, as Hannah has said, I think this project was built incredibly quickly. A lot of the work that we do as an organisation with communities takes place over a really long time, building really deep relationships in a way that we can really make sure that the work that we create is reflective. And I think so what we wanted to do here was to say, how can we connect and care for those stories that people are going to share with us, but in a method that is quick and responsive to the situation that we were in. And so that's something that we hope was achieved. And just finally, just to talk about some of the different responses. So there was such a wide range of ways that our artists connected with the work, from Hannah Ali, who wrote this incredible poem talking about her experiences of grief and losing her father, which the poem then served as an opportunity online to spark a debate about other people's experiences of grief. Nazneen Ahmed, who wrote this incredible poem, and her experience really seeing this archive of postcards was to reflect on her as a pregnant woman at the time, and the fact that at a moment when vaccination wasn't being routinely recommended for pregnant women, she was feeling protected by all of the efforts by everyone going to the vaccination centre to be to vaccinate themselves and to protect her and others. And A Drop of Hope is a line from her poem, which then became the title for the exhibition. To on the totally other side of things, from one individual story to Will Harris, who you heard speaking in the video, who only chose to use the verbatim words of the people who had written, so that actually he tried to minimize his own experience as much as possible and create a poem reflecting those other words. So just a range of different ways that people connected.
If you'd like to see a little bit more, I've just put the URL here, but otherwise, thank you so much for your attention and for listening. And yeah, thanks so much for having us be a part of this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Isabel. Thank you for that very heartwarming initiative and presentation. I can almost feel the emotions of the people who are walking up and reading all that poetry, and making them feel protected by science. Really, that's really amazing. Before we go on now to the next speaker, I just want to say that I've put in a Slido link, because we'd also like to hear from all of you who are participating, attending this webinar. We'd like to know where you come from, what you do, and how you might be using, how this might trigger creative ideas in you for your work. So we'd love to know more about you. So please do go to the Slido link and give your feedback as well. And then we move next to Professor Bryony Thomas of the University of Leeds, who's also been doing amazing work with the underserved communities in the north of England. She works there with teachers and young people to help people's understanding of the role of science in society, using arts and hands-on learning with young people. So over to you, Bryony. We'd love to hear what you're doing and how that's been making a difference with young people and science.
Thank you so much. I will just share my screen with you.
While Bryony is waiting, I'd just like to also let everyone know, please, if you have any questions, put it on the Q&A, and we'll have a discussion at the end of the session. Sorry, Bryony, please, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. So, yes, I'm an associate professor at the University of Leeds, and I work in a space that kind of falls between the arts and sciences. So I'm passionate about creative education, how we can broaden the use of arts across all the disciplines. And I lead a fantastic team of researchers and practitioners that spans arts, virology, education, and health. And I'm going to share an approach that we developed in the pandemic. So all about hands-on learning and how we could use the arts to engage young people to talk about the science that underpinned the pandemic, and an approach that was to empower young people through collaboration and creative engagement. So what was our purpose for doing this? So of course, the pandemic has shown us that science communication has never been more essential. But despite this, many people and communities have not been successfully reached, certainly in the UK, by the COVID-19 messaging, and young people were one of these groups. So a study by the British Science Association in 2020 revealed that almost 9 in 10 young people between the ages of 14 and 18 felt that scientists and politicians were leaving them out of the COVID-19 conversation. So hopefully you'd think we were doing better by 2022. But a follow-up survey found that most people, young people, still think that scientists don't represent them and are not doing enough to reach them. So there's some stats there, 15% thought that scientists are not speaking directly to them. Only 16% thought that scientists are relatable and approachable. And really worryingly, only 8% could think of a scientist that looked like them. So we know that children and young people want to take an active stance in changing the world. And whilst there's been an increase in trust in science during the pandemic, there's really this opportunity gap between what young people want and the actual interactions that they experience. So 40% of the young people surveyed said they wanted to hear more from scientists. So this was our starting point. And our approach to the challenge was built on the modelling work that I'd been doing prior to the pandemic. So I've been developing dynamic 3D models to communicate the mechanics of viral infection. So this is a representation of one of the models we were working on that you can see here. And the idea was to design these representational models that aid the understanding of this complex phenomena that's invisible to the human eye. So the three-dimensional tactile models are a really good way of engaging younger learners through seeing and touching and manipulating them. And although there are virus models that exist, they tend to be presented as these static learning tools, although viruses are these dynamic entities and they undergo changes during the infection process. And that's what we were trying to show. So our initial thinking, when we started working on these viruses before the pandemic, was connected to the childhood immunization program. And we started off by creating this model of poliovirus. So when we work on the design process, we use co-design to create models based on the idea of viruses as these nano machines and visualizing these nanoscale mechanisms. And we engage with young people to seek their input into the designs and the functionality and how they can aid their understanding of the virus function and the infection process. And to do this, we use sketches, low fidelity prototypes like plasticine models, and then we digitally fabricate testing prototypes that the children can explore. So this image is the first testing prototype for the poliovirus model, and it shows a child exploring the internal mechanism. And actually, with this one, the children love taking it apart and actually working out the mechanics of how the whole thing operated. So working with children and young people provides really valuable insight for the iterations of the design work we can do. And this is the design that was developed from that testing prototype that you just saw. And the different structural proteins of the virus are represented in different colors. And when you actually see the physical model, pressing the pink and blue units activates these changes in the virus that shows what happens when a virus meets the cell. And this star shape in the center here, which represents another protein, it opens and a light shines through to represent this transmission of the genomic material that causes infection. And you can see there's this, we created this antibody, matching antibody that locks onto the virus and can show how it blocks infection. So this is the digital representation of what the poliovirus model looked like. And we took this to local schools during the pandemic to see how the design work that we were doing could support children's understanding of science in the pandemic and what we could do to support the local community. So we approached 2 schools in the local community of Batley in the north of England. Now, Batley is classed as an underserved community and it's been hard hit by the pandemic. So it's a primarily Pakistani Muslim community with a high proportion of children with English as an additional language and a high proportion of special needs children, certainly higher than the national average. So that's the community we wanted to work with. And this is how what we call the Keeping It Real project was born. So through discussions with the schools, we decided to focus on younger learners. It became really apparent that there's limited subject coverage of microbiology and disease until the later stages of science education, so like 14 plus in the UK. So it's more specialist knowledge within our schooling education rather than being part of this sort of core general knowledge of science for all learners. So while the British Science Association survey had focused on older school pupils, our concern there was actually even less communication for younger children. So through discussions with the schools, we decided that the most valuable approach would be to work on a programme that could run as a 6-week topic. So rather than doing 1 or 2 individual interventions, we would run on an educational programme with them over a term or a half term. So we approached this as an action research project, creating materials each week on topics and receiving feedback from the teachers and the pupils to help refine the next week's content and activities. So it's a fairly intensive process. And the academic team were not able to go into the schools because of the social distancing and the restrictions on visitors into schools. So we were working at a distance and collaborating with the teachers and pulling together all the materials and resources. So the starting point for the design of this learning programme was not just about what the children had learnt in science already, but importantly, really what they wanted to know. So as we started to think about what the programme was going to be, we asked the children a very simple question. If you could ask a scientist anything, what would you ask? And this is the wall of questions that they ask, which forms part of the online exhibition that we presented at the end of the project. And the questions the children asked ranged from vaccines and how they work, the speed of how they were created, to longer questions about how long would the pandemic last, and really heart-wrenching questions about becoming ill and how to protect your family. And for me, I find this wall of questions a really, really powerful part of the exhibition. So taking all this into account, we designed this 6-week programme that covered topics from a basic introduction to what microbes are, viruses, and then a focus on coronavirus. We covered the immune system, an introduction to the immune system, white blood cells, and how vaccines then work. Also who scientists are and the different types of roles within science, ending with a historical recap about pandemics and how our understanding of science through history has helped us overcome COVID-19. And within this, the diversity and knowledge of the team helped us to ensure that we were using culturally relevant materials for the children and for this community. So the focus was on arts-led engagement and the visual exploration within science. So using creative and active and reflective approaches to encourage discussion within the classroom amongst the children as they engaged in the activities. So there's this real sense of peer learning amongst the groups as well. So we integrated creative activities such as clay modelling and drawing and creating 3-dimensional paper viruses, through to storytelling and creating storybook characters based on science. There were also games such as herd immunity bowling and pandemic snakes and ladders, which the younger children really particularly enjoyed. So the 3D models that we created at the university were interwoven into the activities. So the poliovirus model was used within teaching about antibodies. And here's the physical model within this image, and pupils managed to lock the antibody into position so that the virus cannot open to infect the cell. So we worked with schools also on a new prototype model for coronavirus. So this model shows how the spike protein acts like an arm, and it grabs the cell, and an elbow-like joint bends to show how the spike pulls the virus and the cell together during the infection process. And you can see here, this is the testing prototype that the pupils used. And this is the current working model of what the final design might look like. And we're still working on this with schools because it's an iterative process of design and evaluation. So of course, we were creating all these activities in very uncertain times. And at the time when we were putting all this together, the schools were only open to key workers children in the UK. And we didn't know whether the activities would take place in school or at home. So with most activities, we ensured they were using really low cost resource and could be done at home. But the physical models posed more of a challenge. So we decided that we'd create augmented reality models that could be accessed from a smartphone or through some web embedded AR. So if you've got a smartphone handy, these are scanning one of these QR codes will show you some of the models that we created. So there's the poliovirus model, which you can actually go inside and see the mechanical mechanisms inside it. We've got bacteriophage augmented reality, which helps the children understand the different scale and size of microbes, so they can compare the size of these bacteriophage viruses to a bacterium. And then we've got the coronavirus model, so they can actually go inside that as well and see the genomic material, which looks like beads on a string. So digital technology also provided a solution at the end of our exhibition, our project at the end of for the exhibition. So we couldn't hold that, unfortunately, physically within the Batley community, which is what we'd hoped due to social distancing. So we ended up creating a VR exhibition. And this video quickly takes you around what the virtual gallery of work looks like. And we also created a web page of the children's work, so it was easier to view on smartphones or low-powered devices. And there were over 270 pieces of work within the gallery. So what did children make of all this? So evaluation was embedded throughout the programme, so we could be responsive to the needs of the schools, both in terms of what the teachers were experiencing and how the pupils found the work. So it was this collaborative process between partners. So at the end of the programme, pupils ranked their enjoyment and satisfaction of the whole programme of work at 91% based on ranking at 4 and 5 star, as they enjoyed it quite a lot, or they thought it was absolutely fantastic. So that was, I mean, for us, really, really positive feedback, sort of beyond what we could have imagined. And informal feedback from the head teachers was that the schools were buzzing with excitement about the work. And here are a couple of my favourite quotes from the children. One about the virus model and how they were talking about the coronavirus prototype and how it's the best way for them to learn because they can really understand how the virus works. And the other quote, I mean, what can we say about if children want another week of this science learning, then we're obviously doing something right. So the teachers spoke about how the arts activities had supported the well-being of the pupils after such a difficult and isolated year, which was particularly important. And we were really, really, really pleased to hear this feedback from the schools. And particularly the group activities and making activities were valued because of how isolated the pupils had felt. The secondary school science department are now looking at how they can embed this learning within their standards of learning for all pupils going forward, and are running this activity again across their year 8 group, which is sort of age 12 to 13. And this is one of the most powerful quotes I think that we got from one of the teachers, talking about how the sessions had really empowered the children, and as they'd gone along the learning programme, how they became more confident in being able to challenge the rumours that they were hearing in online and within the community, and how they could do that themselves. And this is a quote from a Year 5 teacher, so teaching sort of age 8 and 9. And really to be empowering children at that age, to be able to be confident and understand the science and what's happening in the world and the role of science in society was really what we were aiming at. So this word cloud is essentially a summary of when we asked the pupils, what was your favourite part of the programme? And this is all activity focused, really. They were obviously keen on so many different things, but we can really see there the sort of modelling and the making activities, but also, you know, we've got in there the Zoom calls with the scientists, so that engagement with the scientists for the question and answer sessions was obviously very important too. So where are we going with this now? Well, from the pilot project last year, we've extended the work into an educational research project looking at how we can combine arts and science and broaden the curriculum in microbiology and disease control within schools between the ages of 7 and 13. And we're working with the established relationships with the community in Batley across 4 schools and over 300 pupils this year. So another exciting development that we have is a collaboration with BRAC University and ARC Foundation in Bangladesh. So through this new partnership, we're scoping opportunities for an arts initiative with urban slum communities in Dakar, and we're exploring the needs and priorities of the communities and how we can use arts to support learning within informal slum schools there. So fantastic new opportunities. So that's it really from me. Just got to thank, there's a huge team of people behind this work. You're only seeing me today, but you know, I've got academic collaborators, there's design practitioners involved, a whole range of absolutely fantastic student volunteers, and of course the schools and the pupils as our partners. And thanks to our funders as well from the MRC, ESRC and the university. And if you want to see more of this work, the Keep It Real website has got loads of information on there, and the exhibitions and galleries from the work this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Branny. Amazing work there. Very, very exciting. And I love the fact that, you know, measuring the impact is sort of integrated into the work as well. So you know how effective it's been. And also the fact that you're expanding, you're now doing something similar with Bangladesh. Are there plans to expand this kind of engagement with young people across other countries and across the UK as well? Considering you started off with your slide where it seems to be very limited engagement with scientists and about science.
Yes, we're certainly, well, it's all a matter of funding, really, is the honest answer. But yes, we have ambitions to do a multi-site sort of international study, but we would really like to be engaging with policymakers in terms of science education, because there seems to be a real gap there.
Great, that sounds interesting. We don't seem to have any questions in the Q&A, although in the chat there are many appreciative comments for all the presentations. Is there any question from anyone? If you could put your hand up. Yes, we have Jagannath Venkatramaya raising his hand. Would you like to share your question? Yes, please go ahead. If you'd like to.
Thanks, Thomas, for a very useful. We had a similar program during 2020 and 2021. It was for 10 weeks each. It was 5th to 9th standard students. It was virtual, and it focused on the COVID-19 the theme we communicated was like, a community has been living through the ages with all these pandemics. And children had an option to write a poem or a painting or a small write-up, 5th to 9th standard. We are very happy that you have done a similar pioneering work at your domain. We'll go through the website and try to learn and communicate. Thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jagannath. There is a question now from Thomas Nguyen. May I ask how impactful your campaign on art or science project in the community, as we all know that a pandemic starts and ends in the community, and so does art? Would Hannah and Isabel like to take that first, and then Bryony, and then Christopher?
Yeah, so unfortunately, because we were set up and got running so quickly, we didn't have any quantitative evaluation. What we were looking at more was the types of responses that we had. So a lot of responses in terms of gratitude for the NHS workers, a lot of responses that were, sorry, I've got my evaluation right here, and also about people's own experience. So we have some quotes and understandings of what people were experiencing when they were in our vaccination center at the time.
Right. Isabel, would you like to add something to that? Or that's okay. Then over to Bryony.
Yeah, I think similarly, because we were doing things in such a responsive way, we tried to capture as much data as possible, but it's obviously limited by how quick. I mean, our program was designed within 6 weeks and was then in schools. So yeah, I mean, we had, so some of the stats, the website had only over 4,000 unique hits, and the social media channels that we were using reached over 71,000 people. But it's obviously difficult to know exactly who you're reaching. And because we were doing things from a distance, we weren't able to be within the community doing the sort of engagement that we'd really like. But I think for us, the real measure of the success is that the communities want to do it again and to have more.
Yes, that's. So Christopher, there's a question for you about the quilt and how that was used to translate science.
Well, I think in that particular project, that wasn't the goal. It wasn't about science communication. It was more about how to allow the community, in this case on a national scale, to process what they've just gone through. So the objective was not science communication per se. It was more about social well-being, healing, recovering from what is essentially a collective traumatic experience.
And it's a linkage, how art and science, go hand in hand, really.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, implicitly, there's the science of how art affects us, yes. And that emerges as well. And I think getting back to the previous question, one of the things that we're very much interested in our program is establishing that normative framework. And so we use the WHO Wellbeing Index for almost all of our projects. We encourage the use of survey instruments that look at not just the deficit model of the impact of these arts projects, but the asset model as well. So for instance, in a project we did in Northern Iraq, working with Yazidi populations, using an arts archival project, part of what we were measuring was not just the reduction of anxiety, insomnia, depressive episodes that many people in that population were feeling as they were recovering from the post-conflict situation, but also what were they gaining in the experience? Was there an increase in the level of trust, of belonging, of being able to cope with their everyday life, being able to imagine what their identity might be like in the future? It's that balanced approach that I think is important, and is and not just focusing on the clinical model, but on a social well-being model as well, which I think, particularly in the realm of arts, is there's a wealth of information and benefit there.
Thanks, Chris. There's another question which relates to, you guys have done such fantastic work that we've heard about. If this is to be, sort of replicated or adapted to other environments, what are the essential things that need to be there, or what is it that, if it's missed out, might lead to failure? And this will be the last question, because we're running out of we're over the hour, but I still think it's a very interesting thing. So I throw that.
Can I give that one a go?
Yes, go for it, Isabel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it goes back to some of what we were talking about in terms of, if you're trying to do something which is participatory and which connects to people's lives, and you're collecting their stories and wanting to do justice really to telling those stories in a meaningful way, I think you have to be very sensitive about how you're doing that, and very clear about what you can and can't do. I think, as we talked about, the program that we worked on was very quick turnaround, and there wasn't long-term, deep, collaborative community engagement across everything. So we tried to create that depth in terms of the output of what was created, and we're really clear with people about, you'll write a postcard, this will be sent to the poets, and then they will interpret this in a multitude of different ways, and that will be displayed. So I think it's always just, when you're working with community voices, being really clear with that community about how you're caring for those stories, and like how much you can do that within the constraints that you're working in, so that people feel respected and part of something in a way which is appropriate to them.
Right. That's critical.
If I can add to that,
please do.
I would say the focus groups at the beginning were really the core of what shaped the project, what we did, how we did it, and members of those focus groups we recruited into our advisory committee. So we were checking in with them with every batch of poetry, and they were advising us as we went along. So we were making sure to check in at every stage, and that was really critical for us to make sure we were on the right path.
Great. Anything you'd like to add, Bryony and Chris, to that?
I'll let Bryony go first. I have a few things.
Yeah, I think so. Similar to what the responses have been already, but the building of those relationships, when you're working with specific communities that have different contexts, make that checking in and making sure that you're doing things that are relevant, meaningful, sensitive to their context is really important. But yeah, from the education project, the relationships with the schools and the teachers were really, really key. And it took a lot of time during the project to have those and to manage them.
Right.
Well, I think from my end, if you're looking at a critical success factor, it depends on what stage of the intervention you're at and what sort of problem you're trying to solve. For instance, at the beginning of the epidemic, there was an acute need to get key messaging out there to save people's lives. So much of our work in arts and health was focused on health communication and behavior change, getting people to practice hand hygiene, safe distancing, staying at home, things like that. But that's not the entire universe of the health benefits of the arts. The other aspect, which I think is important, is not just telling people through an artistic medium what to think and what to do, but actually giving them the tools to express what's important to them. And particularly from a mental health and social well-being point of view, I always go back to my favorite quote from Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist. He said, "Loneliness is not the absence of people. Loneliness is the inability to express what matters to you most." And I think in the spirit of the UN, rather than giving people a work of art or communication, which may encourage them for one day, we give them the opportunity to express themselves, where they become the creators, they become the artists, and then they can experience that healing power of the arts for their entire life. And that's the goal. We are all artists, we are all creatives, and in the story of our lives, the goal is not to absorb somebody else's art in all circumstances, but to have the ability to curate your own life.
Thanks, Chris. On that inspiring note, I'd like to bring this webinar to a close because we've run up the hour. I'd like to thank all the participants, Chris Bailey, Hannah and Isabel from Crick Institute and Poet in the City, and Bryony Thomas from the University of Leeds for very inspiring hour. I'd like to thank all the participants as well. We love your feedback. Please do provide your feedback in the Slido link here, because we really want to know what interests you and how we can make this more relevant, this whole series more relevant to you, and especially about art and science, how you will be using it in your work and your life. So please do provide. It's just 3 short questions in Slido. Please do provide your feedback. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to thank Judith Van Holten. So Judith, please put your camera on. She's, I'm just moderating it, but Judith is the one who put everything together and organized this whole event. So thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Tazara. There she is, Judith. I'd like to thank Tazara Spafford, who's been translating it. So those of you who are more comfortable in French can also follow it. I look forward, this is the end of the webinar, but I hope the spirit, there will be more interactions, collaborations that will come up of this. And I hope all of you will use this, be inspired to do great things in your area of work as well. And also do get in touch with Hannah, Isabel, Bryony, if you want to collaborate with them. And of course, Chris, who leads on art and health in WHO, because this is not a one-time thing. This is, as Chris says, it's something that needs to expand and grow. It's part of our lives. And with that, thank you very much and see you in the next webinar. Thank you.